This is Channel 4, throwing some light on the complexities of modern classical music in Sinfonietta. Tonight, Charles Ives and Anton Webern.
Let's go 2 before H, please. Could we just have bassoon, side drum, piano, trumpet from where you come in with this figure?
A wild idea came to me, to make a piece that no conductor could conduct.
And you just play with literally with what you hear.
The music, in its playing as well as its substance, should have some freedom in action and thought, as of an explorer. These notes, marks, and near pictures of sound, etc., are, in a kind of way, a platform for the player to make his own speeches on.
But you mustn't watch. If you try to watch me, you'll be totally lost. You're in 2-2, right? From the moment they begin, they have chink, chink, chink.
I did what I wanted to, quite sure that the thing would never be played, and perhaps could never be played.
Right. Do it once without me. Just play it as you have it. Chink. Just think about it without making a noise, would you? Letter T.
The words and the music we just heard are by Charles Ives. The orchestra was rehearsing the central section of Putnam's Camp, which is the second of his 3 places in New England. They were not playing incompetently, just in case we gave that impression. It was an attempt to come to grips with the imprecision that Ives actually programmed into his scores. In one sense, all his music is a sketch, free-flowing streams of ideas, sometimes individual, sometimes in combination. He was constantly adding to it. He urged players to elaborate it as they wished. He even refused to copyright it. He was trying to reawaken the untrained performing techniques and attitudes that he so admired in his father's band and in all popular musical culture. These qualities he considered to be the essence of great music making, a natural counterpart of what he was trying to do in his music, which was, he said, to reflect the sense of many people living, working, and occasionally going through the same deep experience together. Music that would give the ever-changing, multitudinous feeling of life that one senses in the city. And Ives was, at least during his creative life, a man of the city. He was born in 1874 and brought up in small-town New England, but he went on to receive the best possible musical education at Yale and settled in New York City, where with a partner he became a millionaire insurance executive. The bulk of his music was composed during the first 15 years or so of this century in New York City, mostly in the evenings and nights after work, and in an ever-increasing frenzy, which finally brought on some form of breakdown from which he never fully recovered, though he lived on until 1954. Ives consciously modelled himself on certain of the New England philosophers, in particular Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose spiritual ruggedness Ives admired. Ives said Emerson hacks his way up and down as near as he can to the absolute. There was also Henry Thoreau, the nature mystic, whose views on music struck a sympathetic chord. Basically, Thoreau believed that the music was not in the notes. Ives echoes this when he describes one of his pieces as the sounds that clothe the music. His own father had chided him once for disparaging the singing of one of the local townsfolk. Don't pay too much attention to the sounds. If you do, you may miss the music. If it was difficult for a 19th century preacher like Emerson to think about the absolute, how much more difficult has it become in the 20th century? In 1985, the musical world celebrated the tercentennials of Bach and Handel. When we listen to their music, its musical time seems composed of
such a meaningfully ordered, organic sequence of events as to suggest that the age that gave it birth was one in which the structure of experience had some universality. Their musical structures have a coherence from which we feel that we can readily extract some meaning. And that is the continuing universal power of such music. It seems to offer some ultimate guarantees. In this century, the structure of experience is not like that. That kind of sharing has given way to something more personal, more private, more individual. Works like the B minor Mass and Messiah will never be written again. But I still believe that music, like all art, continues to be about some ultimate truth. It represents, it refers to something other than itself. Artists in this century have been very self-conscious about this otherness. Self-conscious in that the moment you begin to make something as a work of art, the very consciousness of this act clashes with the spirituality you're trying to embody. Things like method, style, personality, the tools of the trade, tradition, they all get in the way. And in this program, we're going to show how not one but two composers coped with this dilemma. Two composers who, on the surface, would appear to have very little to do with one another. For the moment, let's stick with Ives. I'll never forget an experience I had when I stayed in an old house. One day I discovered a room which turned out to be full of all sorts of old objects, musical instruments, old gramophone records. There was an old horned gramophone. Sheet music, Victorian sheet music of dances and parlour room ballads. It was an absolute treasure trove, a magic place. And I stood in the middle of all this rubbish, started rummaging through, in no order, with no particular purpose in mind. I was simply fascinated. And then, quite unexpectedly, I'd light on something which completely took my imagination, and I'd stand there enraptured. Ives' music works rather like that. It's fun and full of familiar things, a junk room of associations. Ives realized that people create their patterns of experience out of such associations, out of their memories.
For Ives, for most people, he believed, their deepest intuitions had been most intensely felt in childhood. And what he had to do was somehow to bypass adult experience so as to be able to reach back to this state of childhood innocent awareness. Ives knew what the keys to his own memory were. They were the places of his childhood, places in New England, and all the musical events and objects associated with them. Revivalist hymns, spirituals, country dance tunes, band music, the cacophony of sounds heard during holiday festivities, all used freely, like, as he said, a boy on the 4th of July who wants to do anything he wants to do, and that's his one day to do it. Ives doesn't disobey musical rules. He was a highly trained musician, but he does loosen the corset of musical decorum. Anything goes. There's no aesthetic standard, and in that sense, he is a musical innocent. That's the opening of the Alcotts by Ives. The Alcotts, the New England family of Louisa M. Alcott, the author of Little Women. The piece is an evocation of the home of the March family, where Beth sits at the little old spinet piano, in Ives's words, playing at Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Ives believed, as we've seen, that in popular musical culture, universality was instinct, but he believed equally that traces of the absolute were inscribed in the great artworks of the past. The opening of Beethoven's Fifth was his special obsession, an oracle, as he described it, the soul of humanity knocking at the door of the divine mysteries, something that had particular associations for all people. It echoes through the third and last of the three places in New England, the Housatonic at Stockbridge. Ives tells us that it was suggested by a walk that he took by that river, listening to the distant singing from the church. What Ives had in mind was something that gives one a sense of that constant organic flow going on in all life. The movement takes the form of a veil of sound, increasingly agitated, surrounding a tune, an extraordinary tune, which carries a peculiar wealth of associations. As we were recording it, everybody involved said that they seemed to know it. Danny Boy, Luther's Hymn Ein Feste Burg, a blues and a spiritual were all suggested. Actually, the tune is, or at least it begins with, the opening of Beethoven 5 again, but with just one note repeated. It kind of sets you going with its vague familiarity. And in case you think that I'm stretching a point when you hear it, the end of the piece, which is the climax of the whole work, is literally the Beethoven 4 notes, but with a special harmonization that makes it something else. We're going to pick up the score shortly before the chaotic close of the preceding movement, Putnam's Camp.